Good night and welcome to the Galen Hour. This is our fourth episode in this season. We are pleased to have some really exciting and wonderful guests with us this afternoon. We're focusing on Belize's entrepreneurial landscape. Galen University is the producer of this Galen Hour. We focus on academic excellence, sustainable development, and lifelong learning. We're always looking for topics that are relevant to our people and our country and very timely. So we are quite pleased to be here with you tonight. I am Diana Gomez-Perifit, and I am the host for the Galen Hour. I want to take this time to introduce our guests. We have a panel of four wonderful guests with us tonight. We have Dr. Leroy Almendarez joining us. Dr. Leroy is the Executive Director of BELTRAIDE. We can't really talk entrepreneurship in Belize without talking about and including what BELTRAIDE is doing. So welcome, Dr. Almendarez. We also have on with us Mrs. Natalie Goff. Mrs. Natalie is the General Manager of DFC and has held that position quite a while. She's one of our exemplary female in a leading role. I want to welcome Mrs. Goff to our panel tonight. Welcome, Mrs. Goff.
Good night, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I also want to welcome Mr. Chris McGann. Chris is the Managing Director for PPF Capital. Chris is our entrepreneur that we have joining us tonight. And so we'll be able to hear from an entrepreneur who's living the realities of being an entrepreneur in Belize. So welcome, Mr. McGann.
Thank you.
I also want to welcome our fourth guest and also my co-host for the night, who is Mr. Marlow Neal. Mr. Neal is an instructor and the coordinator for the Entrepreneurship and Hospitality program at Galen University. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we have quite a panel with us, and so this will allow us to talk very thoroughly, I would like to think, about the salient issues, the important points of our Belize and what the entrepreneurship. I like to use the word landscape, the ecosystem, but I really want us to get a good overview of what's happening, and I believe there's a lot happening right now. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and to our Galen Hour, and I'd like to invite Marlow to join me with the co-hosting as we go through talking about entrepreneurship in Belize.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Diana, and good night again to our panelists, and thank you so very much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and I do agree with Diana. This will be a very enlightening conversation for myself as well, because there's a lot happening in the landscape, and when we were planning this session, Diana and I had a brainstorming meeting, and is it that we're just hearing the word entrepreneurship a lot more, or is there a spotlight on entrepreneurship in Belize? Is it in our mind, or is this the reality? And I'll just throw that out there for one of the panelists to address, please.
Good night, Marlow, and thanks again for the invitation. Whether it's something that we're hearing about, I think a part of it has to do with necessity. Another aspect of it has to do with the fact that there are individuals who see themselves becoming, not only more innovative, but those who want to, their own independence. That's one of the reasons for becoming an entrepreneur. But I think there's confusion sometimes where the word entrepreneurship or entrepreneur is concerned, because entrepreneurship should have to do with innovation, something unique, rather than because of necessity. It is important, in fact, to look at the market when you're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. What is the market saying? What is the market demanding? And is it just what the market is demanding, or can I become, because an entrepreneur is someone who has vision, comes up with some innovative idea and takes the risk in order to see that materializing. See, and I use the word risk because we're very risk averse. And so individuals tend to be, I need to know that someone pays me every 2 weeks or every week rather than me paying myself. because paying myself is a great responsibility. I have to make sure that I can sustain. I need to pay my bills, etc. And so, so I think now, though, if you look at what is happening, there's a conscious effort to make this transition. And I'm talking about the individuals here, and you have Chris, and he can speak more about that. I know Chris very well. To make that transition because you saw a need. And in market, you established a thing called a niche. And once you find a niche and you start to build client base, you become a market leader. And this is what I keep saying, become a market leader. Make a part where none exists. And if you become that market leader, others have to follow. So you start with 100%, and as the market starts to expand, it might come to a point where you see the need for diversification or differentiation of what you're offering, which still makes you even more sustainable.
I like what I'm hearing. I wanted to throw to the panel a little spin off from what Dr. Almendarez just said. Yes, I agree that entrepreneurship necessitates innovation. And I think it's a good time to bring in COVID. During the COVID pandemic, definitely our people got very innovative, but a lot of it was out of necessity. So how do we really separate it? Maybe that's maybe a debate for another time. And were people just doing entrepreneurial ventures because they had to? I think a lot had time on their hands. And it also presents a question that I threw to Marlow, and I mentioned to you all earlier: are entrepreneurs really born, or are they made, or does necessity push us in that direction?
I will leave the definition to those in academia. I think as a banker, we respond. We respond where there are needs, where's demand, where there are gaps and things like that. And one of the interesting points that Dr. Almendarez made, or Leroy made, is that one who is willing to take a risk, take a new path. So in my opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, the idea might not be new and innovative, but you're willing to go out, to take that risk, forge a new path. I think of something like processing in Belize. You take your fruits. I always think that we waste so much in our country. We have so much. I won't even go there because the passion comes out. But there's so much wasted. We are blessed with so much. And you take I'm just going to use an exotic fruit like crabo. Why they make a new pathway outside of Belize instead of trying to sell? Because once you come up with the idea, somebody else will follow. And you're trying to saturate a market of 450,000 people, with those with spending power even less. So an entrepreneur to me, is the person who will say, well, you know what, I will export my product to Latin America, where there are millions and millions of people. That takes some doing, that takes some coordination, that will take some partnership, idea, organization, and things like that. So I think I will not be caught up with what the definition is as such, but to me, where they are causing new pathways, new ideas are coming up, maybe with built on old ones. So that's my opinion.
If I may just add something here, though, just to piggyback on what Natalie just said. When you talk about the pandemic, and I think it's important that we bring that as a variable that has really, and the word disruptive is now a very positive word. Pivot is a positive word, and many people might not have seen that. We did about a few months into the pandemic, we did a survey just to find out how is it affecting the market, even though we had just had just a few cases. But the global supply chain was being affected, and because global business was being affected, we had to find out how it's going to affect us and make some projections. Of those who responded, 83% fell within what would really come under the definition of entrepreneurship or entrepreneur. And 54% of them were the most vulnerable. I mean, they were the micros, and micros is basically, Mom, I have to pay the bills. And too often we find out that We don't realize that every time you eat a part of one of the products that you're making, you're reducing your profits, but you still have to pay it. And you don't realize your bank account is depleting. And so the other aspect of it, and this is one of the things we also encourage with that data, of course, we use it. One of the major things they were saying, access to finance, but affordable finance. But one of the things that came out of it, and we encourage this, the pandemic was a threat, but also an opportunity, and it still is. Those who pivoted, those who redirect their resources towards mask sanitization and sanitizers and those kind of things, you find out really they have expanded. There are those who have actually created their domestic supply chains. I remember now recently they were making ice cream out of what? Rice and beans ice cream and all different kinds of ice cream. What they did, supply chains, not international, it's disrupted. Let's create it from locally. So the inputs would come from those who make cakes, etc. And they now have started their business. Those who make masks. Of course, now the kind of masks that we're using, the cloth ones don't work anymore because of, that can be saturated. But just simply to say that those who saw and met the needs created by the pandemic, those are the people who are still now benefiting. So they, really, there are those who are affected. And the other things we tried to do, because we did introduce a program to ensure that this sector did not fall under. The other thing that Natalie mentioned was export. Most of those who export are small and medium enterprises, not the large ones. So think about the vulnerability and the fact that an avenue might not have been created for them to sustain themselves, through financing and other things like that. And if that had happened, we know we are not thinking about export-led growth. If we're exporting less, then it means we're importing more and exporting foreign currency, or really the lack of foreign currency coming in and things like that. So many programs now are focusing on MSME because the survivability and the fact that data shows that most of the contribution to the wealth of a nation comes from those who would be described under what is an entrepreneur.
Thank you for that, Dr. Almendarez. And I just wanted to jump in to kind of build off what you're saying. And I actually have a question because Mr. Goff made a very important point in terms of, exportation, that our market size is limited. And Dr. Almendarez, you spoke about the supply chain as well. And what we're really talking about, it's become a really sexy word now when we say ecosystem, but we're just talking about the different players in the game, for lack of a better word. We have the legal and regulatory framework, we have the financial institutions, then you have the suppliers, and all the way down to the end purchasers and the logistics in between. How has that changed, let's say, over the last decade? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, how has it changed during COVID, and how has that ecosystem responded?
Well, quickly to say, and I like to boast this, and Miss Natalie knows this as well as a former board member of BELTRAIDE. BELTRAIDE has its own ecosystem. As a matter of fact, BELTRAIDE is the only institution of its type in the region. Most of the other in the region, you would find it fragmentation. So you'd find we deal with training, small business development, export. We deal with export development. We deal with investment development. In other parts of the region, each one of those areas would belong to some other ministry or belong somewhere else, or they're somewhere else. No, what has changed? In 2012, that's when the MSME strategy was developed because they saw a need again for this sector. And it was incorporated under BELTRAIDE. And because it was incorporated under BELTRAIDE, our Small Business Development Center, which we're really moving towards global accreditation, serves over 1,700 of these entrepreneurs at this time, over 1,700. What we're doing now is to disaggregate, break that data into parts, and to see, what areas are they focusing, because it's important to have a digital footprint. And there's no way we can do things because that old normal is not coming back. No, when we talk about, and I think the other question that you mentioned, Marlow, was on export.
Yes, in terms of the facilitation of export, what has
Right.
changed?
Let me. What is changing right now? And again, I'm being a part of it. A working group has been formed, and it's called an MSME initiative. And what is happening? This is something coming out of the office of the Prime Minister. What we're doing is to simplify all the rules, because remember, there's a challenge where we said doing business in Belize, we were 135 out of 90 based on 11 indicators.
Yeah.
We're focusing on all of those indicators. So now, right now, we're speaking and hearing the investors. We're hearing those who want to do business. One of the major challenges we have in Belize is starting a business. And starting means you register the name, you register for Social Security, you register for taxes, all of those things. It had become so frustrating that it's increasing the informal sector, and that has created its own problems. So what is happening? Simplifying the rules, meaning that you can have, and this is how simplified we want to get it, you can have your mobile phone and being able to do certain things using that. Digitization, that's another big part of it. But digitization simply means in a cohesive manner, a single window type of approach, where if I press a button on a computer, I might be able to download as many these forms as I need, as opposed to having to go everywhere else I need to go to get a form. That means simplifying, also amending legislations. That is a part of the package. Where legislation seem confusing, these things are being amended, because at the end of the day, it goes right back to export-led growth, expanding the domestic pie. And expanding domestic pie includes traditional and non-traditional. One example, who would have thought that other than drinking seaweed, we now have seaweed Johnny cake, seaweed powder bun. You can have really all different kinds of value-added products. And the fact is, seaweed is now farmed, and seaweed creates that natural ecosystem for marine life. And we have some of the best species in the world. It's just a matter now of getting it to a point where it can be quota driven. So just to add some of those things, all these things are being changed. And I can tell you, just in this week, we were looking at it again. Those 11 indicators, to see how we're addressing them, even though the World Bank has discontinued it, we're still looking at them, because it simply means that every dollar that is available out there for business, it's very, very competitive, because the pandemic has caused this great downturn in the global economy.
No.
And just to add, Marlow, and I know Chris wants to jump in because
I want to bring him in.
But just to add that, to summarize what Leroy has saying is that I think the system is being set up, the structured ecosystem is being set up. But it's two things for me. How to make it easy for the entrepreneur to start a business, to access financing, and to do everything, and a sense of urgency. I think what we need in Belize is a sense of urgency to get things done. As development finance institutions, it's not unusual for you to approach a DFI and to wait 2-3 months. Your whole needs may have changed in 3 months. And so how do we do that in a more expeditious manner? But you're using somebody else's money. So you have to come prepared. How do we get our businessmen and women, farmers and everyone prepared to access financing? I think we have to do things that adds value, to add some value to the whole value chain, instead of just saying that you're ticking off all the back boxes. So if in the end we only need 5 of those boxes, let us do that and ensure that what we're doing is effective.
I think that's a very good point. And I would imagine, in terms of ticking those boxes, it's prioritization, right? To use those resources to ensure that we're ticking the right boxes that benefit Mr. McGann. Now I would like to bring Mr. McGann into the fold. Mr. McGann, you're one of the 1,700 that Dr. Leroy Almendarez mentioned. And here I am sitting on this side talking about policy and the academic aspect of entrepreneurship, but you're actually living it. I'm not in your position. I don't have close to 10 people on the payroll. So I wanted your perspective as an entrepreneur. Is what we're saying lining up with the reality? what are you seeing on the ground? And you can start from a macro perspective, and you can give us your opinion of how COVID-19 has impacted your business, and what is the future of entrepreneurship in Belize.
From a macro scale, to echo what some of the other panelists have said, the other side of risk and disruption is opportunity and necessity. And I think you saw a lot of people lose jobs in traditional industries, and they had no other choice than to sort of get on the entrepreneurial journey and entrepreneurial path. I think, in terms of trends changing, I think the first thing you have to figure out as an entrepreneur is what is the problem you're trying to solve, for whom. It's as a basic as that. It doesn't always have to be something sexy like we see. Everybody imagines like we're gonna do this Silicon Valley type stuff or stuff we see on TV. It's you know what? I know a lot of people in the office that don't have time to cook lunch. If I could make healthy meals at an affordable rate and get them delivered, people want that consistency. So that's a need that I'm trying to fill. And you saw a lot of that during COVID. And another thing about COVID and the whole entrepreneurial and business ecosystem, when you ask the question 5 years from now, who drove your digital transformation? Most companies will have to say COVID-19. We're doing this panel via an online platform, and remote work, blended work. The technology was there. We just weren't taking advantage of it until we had to. I think personally, from my business perspective, we're always set up to work remotely, but not remotely for an extended period of time. And I think that was where the sort of pain points came in as you make the adjustment. It's not 1 week. In first instance, it was like a month or 2 or 3, where you have very limited interactions in the office. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs had to adjust to that with COVID, and how does that affect your relationship with the ecosystem, customers, suppliers, financiers, etc. So those are some of the observations I had with the pandemic. But it also created new opportunities, and it's about pivoting and being able to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly jump in and say I like the fact that Chris brought up the issue of both Chris and Leroy brought up the issue of digitization. And for the longest time, we have heard about the cost of doing business in Belize, and that it was going to change and be improved. And so it is really good to hear and welcoming to hear that we're making steps once again to ensure that we improve all of those areas that we are not necessarily doing so well on. But I also want to agree with what Ms. Natalie said about the urgency. There needs to be an urgency. And the COVID pandemic has put us in a position where, with digitizing and with going online and virtual, we have reduced the cost of doing business locally. And I'm hoping that people in their eagerness to go back to what they were so comfortable with don't just get rid of what we have gained from this period. This was a difficult and challenging period, but it was a learning period, and it pushed our way of doing business into that digitized era, something that we were resisting, it seems, for a long time. So I'm just hoping, from the banking institutions to the BELTRAIDE to academia, although Galen was already online, and I must give Galen kudos for that, and even the entrepreneurs in the way how they do business, because we've seen a lot of online business pop up, and they don't have a brick and mortar place anywhere anymore. You can only reach me on my Facebook page or on my website. And so I'm just hoping that technological aspect that we've seen continues to hold true.
Absolutely, Ms. Diana. That's a very good point, because with that has come efficiency gains. You mentioned the fact that I think we're each probably in different locations. Well, we have 3 in Belize City and 2 in Belmopan. So I do hope indeed that we do not lose that when things go back to normal, so to speak. But I do have a question now, and I want to bring it down a little more personal, because COVID has brought with it not only economic loss, but maybe an increase in terms of the stress. Now, this is for the entire panel. How do you, as managers, entrepreneurs, how have you been able to, I guess, work with your staff to reduce some of their perhaps anxieties, stress, adapting to this new normal? What has that experience been like, and what has it been for you?
So I guess I could kind of jump in on this one. I think stress levels have a lot to do with the business line or support systems that you're involved with providing to your customers, whether they're other businesses or actually people consuming goods or services. Um, the type of business you are in definitely, first off, contributes to your stress. In terms of COVID, it was quite a challenge to adjust. What do you do with health and safety protocols in the beginning of it? That was, getting masks, getting sanitizers, ensuring that the offices were facilitated social distancing. And for me, we have a small office. We don't see a lot of customers, but you saw all the stores had to put up these plastic screens. Like if you were selling plastic screens, you probably made a windfall because of the amount of them that had to be installed. And then eventually you had the outbreaks. I think all organizations have been touched at this point with infections and the challenges that came with that and how you managed isolation, checking in. Like for me, we had to ensure that you're checking in and how you're doing, how is the family coping, and trying to reach out just to let them know, we're here for you, worry about feeling better first, and then get back to work. We have a small team, so I'm sure my experience would be different from a team of 100 or 200 employees, and the kind of systems that we had to put in. But I think I don't know if a person tells you they have the perfect answer for that question. I like to speak to them and get some advice, because the one thing I know is that every day I learn something new about how to manage personal and team stress in this environment.
Just to add to what Chris is saying, because we have a larger organization, but I think the principles are the same. You have to care. You have to listen. Like for me personally, working at home is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I always attempted it even before COVID, just my mindset, because I got more done when I was in this isolated environment because of the job that I did, right? And but it never worked because the infrastructure was not there. But with COVID, we had to put in infrastructure, so it works perfectly. But there's the young mother with 2 kids at home, it's not working for. So we had to listen. Look, we don't want to work at home. We want to go back into the office. And so you had to kind of see what worked for everyone. You have to give that support. Like you said, the focus on health. If you're out sick, I don't care what you are doing. I don't care, how important your role in the organization. You had to take that time off to recuperate during COVID. You had to listen to your staff. You have to listen to your staff more. So it's kind of what everybody is doing, but you just do it on a smaller scale or a larger scale.
And if I may just add, because I always believe in scenario analysis, and we know that this thing was coming. And so following what was happening in the global, I used to remember I was plotting graphs all day, and notice, we're still flatlining, meaning 0 cases. But with the staff, we got together and we said, okay, what are some of the things that we can do? So I can tell you this. We went fully virtual. I mean, after the first case on March 23rd, remembering when it was, we had already planned scenarios. Do we go hybrid? All of those things. So we went fully virtual, and we did not, the only thing we lost was face-to-face, to be honest. But in terms of productivity, because remember, telecommuting without a pandemic is also a strategic way to get people to be productive. As Natalie mentioned, a person closer to their family might actually feel more productive because there's less fear and those things. So we went virtual. But this was a planned thing because we had discussed the scenario. So that was one. And then we continued to monitor it. And as we monitored the changes as cases started to grow, we went back into the office. We went hybrid. So all of those things had changed. We had our mobile phones. So every unit had a mobile phone. So and then we linked our landlines to the mobile phone. So it was, if you call a landline, you didn't know that someone was answering you on a mobile phone. And so we maintain that contact, because remember, one of the big challenges we also have as the interface for investment is to make sure that we still maintain those relationships. So the relationship existed. Now, where staff is concerned, indeed, we made sure that when they were home, that they felt more comfortable. We also we made sure they had the tools for them to operate, but not only tools. Beyond tools, there are other things that we provided to make sure, really they felt comfortable. We maintained contact. Indeed, I could still remember the first case we had. And one of the things I also do is, even if a staff is not feeling well, nobody would know, but I maintain contact, because that is important. We must all remember the most important asset in an organization is not the beautiful building, it's the beautiful people. And if they are not functioning, and there are challenges that they're facing, and the fears, we even brought in people to speak to them on how to alleviate some of the fears that they may have. And when you build that kind of relationship, as I keep saying, let's build a community at BELTRAIDE, because if you build a community, then basically what you do is to serve your people. And once you serve your internal stakeholders in such a way where they feel comfortable, those external stakeholders will benefit even more.
On that very important note of just how much more attention has been placed on our human resource and our people and the wellness of our people because of COVID, we will take a short break and we'll be right back.
Galen University offers a variety of quality academic programs. Visit our website at www.galen.edu.bz or give us a call at 615-3129 or 614-6415 for more information. Apply today and come soar with our Galen Eagles.
The COVID-19 vaccination helps us to protect the most vulnerable.
Our choice to get vaccinated affects others.
It is a moral responsibility and an act of love for the entire community.
My name is Dorian Barrow. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Education at Galen University.
My name is Melanie Usher Donaldchek. I am the Administrative Assistant to the Office of the Provost at Galen University.
My name is Sherry Gibbs. I'm the Dean for the Faculty of Art, Science and Technology at Galen University.
My name is Dr. Eve Aird and I am the Provost of Galen University.
I got vaccinated because of my family, my colleagues, and my students.
Because I trust the science, but because I also want to protect myself, my family, my colleagues, students, and the community so that we can get out of this pandemic and get back to our lives.
I did it for my Galen family, my family at home, and I did it for you, Belize.
I got vaccinated for my husband, for my children, for my grandsons. I got vaccinated for Galen University, for my colleagues, for my students. I got vaccinated for Belize, for you.
Get vaxxed.
Wear your mask.
Wash your hands
and watch your distance.
The Galen Eagle Podcast every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Catch us live on Galen University's Facebook page, YouTube channel, and select radio stations.
to the Galen Hour. We're entering our second segment of tonight's show. We have a really rich discussion going on with our panelists. We're talking the entrepreneurship landscape in Belize, and we have 4 very exciting guests on with us tonight. I will now invite Marlow to take on the co-hosting. Marlow?
Thank you very much, Diana, and thank you again, panelists, and good night to the viewers. Dr. Almendarez, this question is directed to you. In the earlier segment, you mentioned a strategic plan as far as entrepreneurship in Belize from 2012. I believe that was developed by or with BELTRAIDE. We're in 2022. A lot has changed with COVID, and the environment is still a bit uncertain. Where are we in terms of the larger strategy for entrepreneurship in Belize?
Thank you, and good night again, Marlow. Really, in 2012, let me just quickly say this, because it's important to say this. BELTRAIDE was not BELTRAIDE. It started as Trade and Investment Promotion Service, so it started as TIPS in 1998, but it transitioned, and obviously there was vision enough to see the changing dynamics and the variables within the marketplace in the global economy. Knowing that there are challenges that exist, there was broad-based consultation. And so in 2012, MSME strategy was put together. And that is how BELTRAIDE then got SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, incorporated, primarily to address, go out, look, meet your way, in terms of a concept, assisting you with a business plan, and guiding you, holding your hand. Well, these days it's virtual hand holding your hands to see where you are, and even monitoring and assisting you, when you enter that marketplace. Now, that was 2012. There has been continuous change in terms of the landscape. As a matter of fact, it's important for me to quickly mention this as well. A lot of the things, methodologies we adopted are adopted from Colombia. I represent Belize on the Sempromipe SICA board that deals primarily with small businesses or entrepreneurship within Central America. And so therefore, the ideas that you can get. I sit as the deputy chair of the Caribbean Export Development Agency representing Belize. And the reason I mention that, because these are also avenues where you can access things like financing. So knowing that all of that had changed and the dynamics have changed, the plan is a working document. And so we are at that point now where we're looking at, okay, what do we expand where we are? Do we make it even more inclusive? Yes. And so digitization, as I mentioned, transforming or encouraging, and I can only use the word encouraging, the transition from informal to formal, providing opportunities. Like there's a program that we administer called the MSME Enhancement Program, where if you're a formal entrepreneur, you can access packaging and labeling materials. So we continue to look at the landscape. And like I said, economic recovery for Belize at this time, foundationally, or as the denominator of that recovery, is really MSMEs. But MSMEs, and like I said, creating the environment, access to finance. So this strategy, and actually what is also being worked on at this point in time, is a medium-term strategy, again, that will incorporate those. Chris and I are working on a project where BELTRAIDE, Chris is a consultant as PPF, where we are also working at the strategy. So all of these things now will be put together, knowing what the landscape is, and ask about that futuristic vision. It will include that, knowing where the changes are coming, what is going to look at in the next 5-10 years, renewing that vision, changing the vision if we have to, but ensuring that this sector, and it must include what we tend to refer to as the disenfranchised, women and youth. We have female entrepreneurship program that did not exist before, woman-led. We have a program called BIRF, the Belize Enterprise Revolving Fund, where we're in partnership with the DFC through Miss Natalie. And so these are the kind of things that we're doing. It cannot be a silo approach. And so it must now be all inclusive, and to make sure that all the players are a part of the landscape, because when the changes occur, it will require all hands on deck, as we keep hearing these days.
And if I may just jump in there to build on what Dr. Almendarez mentioned, we are also developing products around to ensure that financing, although we are only one of the players in the whole ecosystem that you referred to, Marlow, we are trying to do our part to ensure that it is done effectively. You may have heard sometime last year that DFC was approved a $30 million line of credit through the IDB, and it's primarily for MSME financing. That's a lot of money to disperse over a 2-year period. So we have to really become aggressive, make the products more accessible, affordable, and we have to even tweak, because last year we launched our empowered business product, and it's primarily geared to women. You hear Doc spoke about ensuring women has access to finance. So that product was geared towards women and young men, what we call at-risk youths. And we had to change some of our usual requirements, like, for instance, collateral. A number of women don't have access to the type of collateral a male may have. So whereby with the ordinary product, the collateral, the real estate collateral requirement started at 20,000, we moved that up to 40,000. Or you could get up to 75,000 with a combination of a small plot of land, 2 guarantors, and things like that. One of the things that was brought to our attention in terms of our product for women, and these are things you don't hear about, but when you do the data gathering on the ground, you have to listen. That if you're giving loans to female entrepreneurs, especially if they are sole proprietors, what happens when they have a baby and they're on maternity leave? So we may have to give a moratorium on payment for about 3 months. Once they bring in their social security form that they're, you really have to keep changing and ensuring that you're in touch with what is required to make the product effective. So that's what we're trying to do at DFC, bring down the rates, because with the IDB financing now, we should be able to bring down the rates, but also look at the terms and conditions to make it accessible. Because what's the use of going out there and announcing you have $30 million in financing, but you can't get it to the final beneficiary?
Thank you so very much for that, Miss Natalie Goff. Thank you. Deanna?
I thank you for the different perspective that each of you bring to the table. And I do appreciate what Ms. Natalie just said about when we're catering to women and women entrepreneur. Being a woman comes with its own particular challenges, particularly if we're going to be working and being leaders in business. So yes, I've noted that I think it was January 31st, our Ministry of Tourism, again through support from IDB, launched a MSME program. We're seeing the Green Climate Fund. There's access to financing through them for organizations and businesses to scale up, to be more climate resilient and all of that. So there really is a lot going on. We haven't really talked much about academia. And Marlow, I'd want to bring you in there. And maybe we could just talk a little bit about what should we see happening within our universities and our educational institutions to make sure that we're meeting the now change and growing need of our ecosystem, our entrepreneurial ecosystem, because doing business now, 2 years after or into the pandemic rather, I think things have changed, and our universities and academia needs to embrace that and move with the change. So from your perspective as the coordinator for our hospitality and entrepreneurship department, I'd like to hear from you.
Well, indeed, similar to the challenges that the other organizations, the other panelists face, we face the very same thing at Galen in terms of the protocols, working from home, taking our programs online, so the full digitization. The question is now, to what extent will some of these programs go back to face-to-face? Does it need to be face-to-face? And the question is, if it is not face-to-face and we have that infrastructure, then automatically our reach extends beyond Belize. And I'm certain we're not the only university that has, figured that out, obviously. But I think what we are also figuring out, and Miss Natalie and Leroy alluded to it, and Chris as well, is the importance of relationships. So those days of academics sitting in ivory towers, those are long gone. We have to be involved with the private sector. We have to partner with the private sector. Mr. McGann taught, I think you developed, Chris, a what was it, blue and green financing course that was at the request of the government. So we're seeing more and more engagement with the private sector. And so that you have this connection with the ecosystem, because academia really is an important part of the ecosystem. If you look at the US, for example, a lot of research and development comes out of the universities. And by the way, these are government funded universities in the US, or government subsidized. And that is actually a center for innovation and a hub for innovation in a lot of these municipalities. So you do see in the US that relationship between academia and the private sector. And I think now in Belize, that's an opportunity, at least where Galen sits, we see that as something that we need to grow. And we're reaching out like that. Now, just to take it one level below that, in terms of the type of academics that you have on staff, we have a call. The call now is for the academics to actually have practical experience in the areas that they're teaching. Because it's one thing to teach and to apply what is in the text, but to actually be on the ground, it adds a enriching environment to the classroom. And I think that's what this generation is clamoring for. It has to be applicable. They want to know how this relates to what is actually happening out there. So I think those are the changes that we're seeing in academia, and I'm excited about the changes and very optimistic. So I look forward, Dr. Almendarez, to that plan, and to see, we have had consultations on it to see exactly how we can support that plan going forward.
And let me quickly add here, because I'm also an academic. And so therefore, being involved in, I don't know if you can hear me, but being involved in teaching at the university, and I've taught at Galen as well. You mentioned something in terms of the relationship. Course offerings must be demand-driven, market-driven. In other words, I can't decide what you want as an employer. The employer, through needs assessment, determines what new programs, and it does not have to be a degree. The other thing I've seen, I used to teach entrepreneurship at one of the universities, let me not be specific. And, the course, you could see some of the most creative and innovative things that could come out. After in other words, the other thing is students should no longer be grade driven. I just want the A. After the A, I forget about everything else. That's not what it should be. Take some of those things. Put together a business plan, because you do, and try to get some financing through DFC or somewhere else. These things can materialize, because if you don't register it as a business, somebody takes your idea, benefits from it, and you don't even get 1 cent from it. So it's important that we get them to understand that, take it to the other level. The university, sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean
to. Really, and like I said, academia is one of those things that runs in my veins. I haven't been teaching because of being busy, but it's something that, because when you teach, you also learn. It keeps you fresh, and it helps you to look for innovative, that word that we don't use, when we look at Belize's innovation index, because there's so many indices out there. But that relationship is very, very important. There are some countries where the university is so aligned with some business that's what they do. Be a feeder system. Yeah. Create greater independence. And through that independence, believe me, you see how many scholarships and all of those things come. And as you mentioned, Marlow, research, there's so many problems to solve. As Chris said, what problem do I want to solve? There's so many problems. Just don't solve the symptoms and kill the patient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's refreshing, it's welcoming, I should say, to hear about organizations like the one Chris and Marlow are involved with, PPPF Capital. Mm-hmm. Because if we're going to do entrepreneurship correctly, and I just want to say, when you talk about born or made, I think a successful entrepreneur, there's a difference between an entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur needs to be molded and mentored, and because they have to embrace the structure that might not be a part of that creative side that they have. But to be successful, you have to understand what it is to run a business. And you as the entrepreneur have to know that. You can't just leave that in somebody else's lap, you know. But we need Chris and Marlow innovative financial instruments, the angel investing, the venture capital, because it's not all about loan. Sometimes these businesses cannot just take up, they don't have the appetite for just a loan. They need the additional support in terms of grants and, you know, like what we are doing with BELTRAIDE, where there's a part loan, part grant. That's how you get people on their feet. They need support, but we have to be intentional and do it with a sense of urgency.
Definitely. So I think we're winding down to the last few minutes of this discussion. It has been quite a healthy discussion. I think some of what Leroy mentioned takes us back to where we started the conversation with some students may have wonderful ideas, and we would think that they would want to take it to the level of making it a business, but they're not interested. They're not willing to take the risk. They're not dedicated enough, and that's not what they're doing. So it kind of brings us back to we can teach our young people and or populace to be entrepreneurial, and they can either use it to create their own business or they use it within the organization within which they work. I think Marlow mentioned that earlier about entrepreneurship, or and you know, you can still be entrepreneurial minded within the organization within which you work, even if you are not doing your own thing. But entrepreneurship is here to stay. It is absolutely a huge part of what drives our economy. I think if I quote what our minister said when he launched our MSME grant program early in late January, 70% of the economic activity and jobs within that industry, you know, comes from entrepreneurial activities. And this is true for any economy. And so it is a pleasure to see what happened because of COVID. I mean, I give COVID its pluses and its for the good things it brought, and we will always dislike COVID for the negatives that it brought to our people and our country. But it cannot be totally disregarded, because there are lots of good things that it brought to the forefront. So I'd like to give Chris an opportunity to say a few last words, since we haven't heard from Chris in this second round as yet, or did we, Chris?
Sure.
Chris?
Sure. Thanks for that. You know, I think I'd like to kind of build on what Ms. Natalie was saying. You know, 110% echo what you were saying in terms of the types of financing that entrepreneurs should be seeking. And it kind of goes back to culture. I remember many moons ago when I had first started doing some lecturing at Galen, they always gave me the difficult classes, for want of a better word, like teaching about banking and finance in the Belizean economy, or investments, introduction to investments. And you got to teach kids about, or adults, I can't say kids, adults, young adults, older adults, mixed ages, about stock markets and switching of ownership. And you ask the question, would you give up, you know, 50% ownership or 60% ownership to own 40% of a bigger pie? And even after the whole class, a lot of the answers were no. You know, I want 100% control. And I think that's a part of it that we have to address. I mean, we were doing some research with the SME strategy that we were working with BELTRAIDE on, and most of the businesses that we spoke to were micro businesses. How do we get more businesses from the idea phase to a micro business to a medium business and to a larger enterprise that's more able to weather a shock in cash flows? It's really about getting the right partnership and financing, getting a board of directors, getting a partner that holds you accountable. It's like when you're exercising, you get up these mornings, it's been cold in the past few mornings. If I'm to get up by myself, I'm like, not today. Hey, I'm outside, you know, and that's the kind of accountability that taking on a partner might bring to you, because it's not only your capital that's on the line, and they might help you with their connections and their network and helping you to take your product or service to customers. So I think that's a part of the entrepreneurship journey that we have to address, the willingness to partner, the willingness to look for equity investors, because taking on an equity investor takes some of the risk out and then makes it more attractive for an institution like the DFC to come and lend you a working capital line or to finance some particular capex that would be a more longer term facility. So I think that's critical. Academia has a role to play, getting the young people and older people that are retraining the skills that they need to hit the ground running in the job market. And it might not always be a degree, it might be a certification, and it might be responding to the needs. So I think we all have a role to play in the ecosystem and changing the culture and making entrepreneurship something that people dream about, not landing that perfect job, but maybe starting or being a part of starting that business. Throw it back to the panel and to the host for final comments.
Marlow, would you like to help me close out this evening's Galen Hour?
Most certainly I would. It's a lot to unpack. It almost feels like we need a part two. I thank the panelists so much for their time. You can clearly see from the different elements here and I'm using that term again, the ecosystem, that entrepreneurs should be optimistic. Entrepreneurs should network, and entrepreneurs should realize that you're not born an entrepreneur. You can be molded, as Miss Natalie said. Academia is here to help. The SBDC is there to help. BELTRAIDE is there to help. Dr. Almendarez, Miss Natalie, you have very experienced lending officers and executives at DFC. You have the programs, some of them tailor-made to assist entrepreneurs. They're there to give advice as well. And I have known Chris McGann for many, many years, and he's there for advice as well. So like Chris mentioned, entrepreneurs, let's not do it on your own. A network is very important. And sometimes all it takes is to knock on a door, and you'd be surprised what doors open. So I'll hand it over back to you, Diana.
Thank you, Marlow. Thank you for co-hosting with me tonight. This was a very interesting and informative session. I thank our guests, Mrs. Natalie Goff, Dr. Leroy Almendarez, Mr. Christopher McGann, for joining us tonight, talking all things entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is alive and promising to do well for our people and our country. We look forward to the changes that are coming. We look forward to what BELTRAIDE, DFC, and all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem brings to our country and our people. We know how important this is to our economic development, and we really wish all of our entrepreneurs well, and all of the organizations that are working with and pushing for improved growth in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It's always a pleasure to be here with you on a Wednesday night. This is the Galen Hour. It is a product of Galen University. It focuses on academic excellence, sustainable development, and lifelong learning. Thank you and good night. See you here next week, Wednesday, same place, same time. Good night.
On the lovely hills of Galen, purest mountains rose and fell, watering the western gardens where us two